I'm at the Fitzwilliam Museum in Cambridge to see Real Families, Stories of Change, an exhibition that brings together 120 works from painting, photography, sculpture and more that really explores different perspectives of the family. In this exhibition, we start with a timeline. Now this is really interesting because really we start with 1978 being a watershed moment for kind of the eruption of different sorts of families. There's a front page headline which looked at the outrage of two lesbian mothers having custody over their children. And if we think about how much has changed in 50 years, this exhibition also coincides with that. The amount of acceptance with family life as well. But also what this exhibition looks at is the different aspects of family life which aren't often always put at the centre of museum exhibitions or society at large. As part of the wider research, this exhibition really explores the last half century of how families have developed but also been accepted by society. There's a great line in the catalogue which interviews a 12-year-old child who was born into a queer family. And they said, queer families aren't that different from any other family, it's the way that they get treated in society. And I think that's something we have to constantly question when we go around this exhibition, because what at first might seem like society's default nuclear family is in fact something else, and there isn't any difference between that. And I think it's getting us to accept and realise all the different types of families that exist in this world. There's an extraordinary work called Alone Time 19 by J.J. Levine, a genderqueer artist, a mother and a father, a boy and a girl, seemingly the nuclear family that society has historically and traditionally told us about. But actually, if we look at this closely again, the same person is acting as the mother and the father, and both the baby boy and the baby girl, getting us to re-question what we think of as a traditional family. There's so much joy in this exhibition. One of my favourite works is by Elisa Nissenbaum. It's this work that explores two lesbian mothers and their children, and they're all spread on a bed, completely at ease with each other, and showing us that this is a family portrait of the modern day. Although this exhibition is about families, it's also about the absence of family as well. In 1963, when Mary Husted was 17 years old, she was a single mother who gave birth to a baby boy, Luke. Because she was single, she was forced to give up Luke for adoption, and she had only 10 days with him until he went off with his new family. And so during that 10 days, to almost hold on to those memories, she drew him 3 times. At 3 days old, at 8 days old, and at 10 days old, almost to preserve the viscerality of that memory. 28 years later, she's still dealing with this subject matter, and she makes this work called Dreams, Oracles and Icons, a work that she actually went on to donate to the Women's Art Collection here at Murray Edwards College and Cambridge University. When Luke was 44, he was looking online at the Women's Art Collection and actually found this work by his mother and pieced together that this was his mother and they'd never met before. And actually, after tracking her down, they went on to meet each other and since then have had an amazing relationship. Art history is saturated with images of the mother and child, but so rarely do we see the father and child from a woman's perspective, especially the mother. And what happens when they capture that really intimate portrayal? Well, that's exactly what Winifred Nicholson did in 1927, almost 100 years ago, but still their intimacy feels so fresh and contemporary. Across the room from this work, however, is a work from 1932 of that same child, this time with his sister, but their father is missing. What Winifred Nicholson is capturing here is the fact that actually the absent father, what happens when a father goes off and marries someone new? What happens to those children? There's something so emotional about this work because the children feel so innocent and almost alone as well. There's no parent there to almost act as that scaffolding to keep them up. And actually it's also looking at this idea of women as mothers and artists. You know, actually while she's painting this work, although she's looking after her children, she's also being a mother at work. Alice Neel painted all sorts of families throughout her extensive career that started in the 1920s and ended in the 1980s. And in her paintings of families, I think there's much more of a tension than when she paints other people's children. Here behind me is this extraordinary portrait called the DeVay twins. And I love the fact that she's focusing on twins here. They may be identically dressed, almost absurdly so, with their almost kind of scalloped-like collars and red dress. But actually what she's doing is she's really focusing on the individual of these two girls as well. Their facial expressions are different. She's giving them different eyes. She's talking to them both equally and giving them equal status in this painting. In this exhibition, we explore artwork that's made over the last few hundred years, but there are also artworks that are made in the last few years as well, like this work behind me by Joy Labinjo. What I love about this work is that she's also exploring the grandmother and grandchild relationship, something that is equally as important as a mother and child or a father and child. And I love the fact that she gives life to these figures who might be, decades apart, but still that communion of love and intimacy and the sharing of knowledge and gaining knowledge is completely present in this work. There are all sorts of family dynamics in this exhibition, and one of them is this idea of dysfunction, but also the acceptance of dysfunction. All families are dysfunctional, no matter how perfect it may look on the outside, and I think that's what we really see here. Paula Rego makes that explicitly clear, and actually does that with a sense of humour. And then across the room, we see Tina Barney's images, these two images next to each other. Because Tina Barney herself photographs affluent families in America, and almost this idea of the kind of perfect American family. But what she does, she exposes their dysfunction, and actually in a way it catches us off guard, because from the outside all these families are supposed to look perfect, and yet she shows that there are all sorts of dynamics within them. Perhaps also because people are forced into doing certain roles to conform to society. But then we see this beautiful image of these two gay dads with their beautiful boy George, and it erupts with happiness because they're not constrained with these rigid structures that society tells us to. So there's also a freedom in this family dynamics as well. And we end this exhibition with a spotlight on the British artist Chantal Joffe. And in this room, it's almost like a cycle of life. The first image, Story, is only a recent portrait, but Chantal is memorializing the memory of being that young girl with her fingers in her mouth, tucked up beside her mother, who's reading to her. Not only is she transporting herself at this time, but even as a viewer, we go back to that moment, how we want to clutch on to our mother and wanting that story to last forever. We then meet Chantal as a young mother, clutching to her daughter Ez. Although this portrait is larger than life, almost on the scale of the old masters, because she's nude, there's also a vulnerability to it as well. We then meet her dealing with her own mother and traveling to see her in Hastings and dealing with her in old age. And then we end with a picture of Chantal and Richard in this sort of harmonious bliss. Again, all these works show these different dynamics and tensions, but also intimacies between family members that we all have experienced in our life. Real Families, Stories of Change is on at the Fitzwilliam Museum until the 7th of January 2024.